Hi, my name is Dr. Aaron Kaweblum, Kaweblum. I'm a pediatrician and a MOEL, and an emergency room pediatrician. I left Mexico City to move to the United States in 1983, and I came to Boca Raton in 1986.
Welcome, Dr. Kaweblum. I'm Dr. Miriam Sano-O'Dallin, a professor of history and Jewish studies at Florida Atlantic University here in Boca Raton, and an interviewer with the Boca Raton Historical Society and Museum. And this interview is being done for the Jewish Community Oral History Project. We are taping this interview on Tuesday, May 29th, 2018, at the television studios at Lynn University in Boca Raton, Florida. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Dr. Kaweblum, let's start with your professional life. You are a very well-known pediatrician with a long-established practice in Boca Raton. You are also, as you said, a mohel, a ritual circumciser. What would you like to tell us about your professional work? What are your specialties or special interests or things that you've written that listeners might want to know about?
Yeah, in the pediatric world, I specialize in several items. One of them is pediatric behavior. I've seen in the last few generations that most parents don't think of what's good or what's bad for the children. They just think, please baby, don't cry. If you cry, I get you the food you want. If you cry, I pick you up. If you cry, I bring you to bed with me. So instead of parenting, these parents are stopping their children. So in order to help the majority, because my patients know what to do, I wrote a book by the name of Cry Stoppers, Step by Step for Parenting Guides. And it's been very helpful to many parents that they call me and they email me that thanks to the book, their babies are sleeping all night and they are behaving okay and they are not picky eaters, etc. And from the point of view of asthma, the asthma is such a prevalent disease that even though I didn't do a fellowship on lung disease, my interest is being basically on asthma, and I have a large populations of patients that come to me. Now, nutrition-wise, we see a lot of obesity nowadays. And I believe that obesity starts because of the parents' fault. It's not the kid's fault. So in the first 5 years of life, if parents don't teach the child a good lifestyle, not a diet, the kid will become overweight with all the consequences of diabetes in young children that was generated because of obesity.
Mm-hmm. And we've talked about before the interview. I asked you what percentage of your patients are Jewish, would you say?
I will estimate about 40%.
Mm-hmm. And would you say that the children of Boca Raton present any problems that are different or more intense than children of any other township? Are they, for example, outsiders might imagine they would be more spoiled or more entitled than other children? This is a very affluent community. Have you seen any evidence that that shows up in their medical treatment in any way?
Well, affluent patients, regardless of what religion they are, many times tend to spoil their children and make the wrong decisions for them, but that has nothing to do with what religion they are.
Mm-hmm. So non-Jewish parents who are affluent treat their children the same way?
Equally, and they try to spoil them equally, and their grandparents try to spoil them as well. So basically, there's no difference.
That's interesting. And you are also a mohel. Tell us a little bit about what a mohel is and what mohel do.
Yeah, in the Bible, when you read about Abraham, the forefather of the Jewish people, God commanded Abraham that every Jewish baby should be ritually circumcised on the 8th day of life. From that moment on, the baby is given a name that he carries for a lifetime, and that also becomes part of the community in an official form.
Baby boy, you should say.
Of course, a baby boy, yeah. And so that's why we do the ceremony on the 8th day. Sometimes it could be delayed because of health reasons or even personal reasons, but it can never be done before the 8th day. In my case, I make that religious observance that's been around for thousands of years, I make it more medical in the sense that I'm Orthodox. I do a ceremony that all rabbis accept, but I use a local anesthesia because babies do feel the same level of pain as adults. And even a famous rabbi in Muncie, New York in 1980 made a statement that doing a surgical procedure on a human being without anesthesia goes against the Jewish principle of something called pikuach nefesh. Pikuach nefesh means that the person's life oversees any religious law. So like on Shabbat when I am on call, I do make rounds because I have to take care of somebody that's sick. So even though I'm breaking the Shabbat laws, I'm not, because I'm taking care of sick people. So doing a circumcision or Brit Milah without a local anesthetic is in the same category as trying to harm a baby.
Mm-hmm. So when you're asked to do a Brit Milah, as it's called, what do you do? How do you prepare? What do you say to the parents?
Well, I have a very organized system. As soon as I get contacted, many times months before the baby is born, I have a booklet that I email to the parents, and the booklet goes from A to Z, first explaining the meaning and purpose of the ceremony, how to prepare, what kind of furniture they need to have, what kind of items they need to buy for the aftercare, what kind of lighting I need. So everything is spelled out perfectly well. And at the end of the booklet is a questionnaire that when the baby is born and they call me and we have agreed on a time and a date, they fill out the questions and they send it back to me. And so that's how we officially establish a date for a Brit Milah. At that point, I also send them also by email the instructions of the aftercare.
By the way, when you say parents contact you months in advance, when in history or in years past did parents get to know for certain that they were going to have a boy, or did they contact you just in case when they didn't know they were going to have a boy or a girl?
Maybe 15, 20 years ago, they were hoping to have a boy, and in case it was a boy, they will use me. I would say 90% of people that contact me, the mother already knows that she has a boy.
Mm-hmm. And when did absolute knowledge of the gender of the baby become common medically?
I will estimate in the last 15 years. Yeah.
Mm. And so what qualifications and training does a Moel have to have?
Well, first of all, you need to be certified by a Moel that's known, that has the ability to train you and has a reputation. So in my personal case, when my wife was expecting our first son, our firstborn, we were still living in Mexico. And as a religious Jew, I knew that one of the biggest commandments is for a father to circumcise his own child. In my personal case, when I was in medical school, in order to help my economical income, I used to help my wife's uncle. He is a urologist in Mexico City. So I became his assistant.
He's a what?
Urologist.
Oh, yes,
yeah.
urologist.
So I became his assistant. So I went to hundreds of surgeries, like circumcisions, kidney surgeries, and all that. So I really knew the technique very well, but I needed the religious certification. So a few months before my son was born, and then we didn't know it was going to be a son there because we didn't have any idea then. I went to New York, and I was certified by 3 of the main rabbis in New York City. I spent 2 months in New York. So when I came back and I had a baby boy, he was the first official Brit Milah that I did in Mexico. But by then, I had already done like 300 medical circumcisions and babies before I did my son.
Mm-hmm. So when you came to Boca Raton, when did you actually arrive in Boca Raton? Did you live in Boca Raton or did you live outside?
No, I was doing my residency in the University of Miami at Jackson Memorial. And my last year of residency was 1986. So I was looking for a community where to settle because I knew I was going to work somewhere. When I learned that there was a community that was about to be formed, they didn't have any building yet. They had some land already, but there was no building. The rabbi was not very stable in the area. So I decided I want to be pioneer in a community and start it from scratch. So I decided to look for a job in Boca Raton. And in the first 2 years, I worked for a group that had an office in Boca Raton and another office in Pompano. And I became in love with Boca. When that group disintegrated for the reasons of their own, I opened my office in Boca, and that was 1988, 89.
The medical group.
The medical group, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And do you remember, what was the first, and you became a mohel for the community in Boca Raton. Do you remember the first circumcision you did?
Well, if I'm not mistaken, the first circumcision I did in the new building of Boca Raton Synagogue was of a friend of mine, a doctor. and now that he is already married, but I think he was the first I did in Boca Raton Synagogue. But I'm not exclusively in Boca. I've been called everywhere. I go to Homestead. Sometimes they fly me to different cities in different countries. But mainly I'm in Boca, but I go to all over the South Florida area.
Mm-hmm. And since you began your career since you moved to Boca Raton and joined the BRS, the Boca Raton Synagogue community, how many Britot Milah, how many circumcisions would you estimate you've done?
Well, until now, I estimate I have done more than 7,000, including medicals, because I do a lot of medical circumcisions. So I think I'm done like 7,000. I keep records of every bris that I've ever done. But circumcisions, medicals, I don't keep records. So I estimate it's 7,000.
What is a medical one versus a religious one?
A person that's not Jewish, that wants somebody that has experience, that uses a local anesthesia. There are a lot of complications of circumcisions when it's not done in the right hands. So many people come to me because of that.
And there are a lot of medical reasons to have it done that are not religious.
Well, the American Academy of Pediatrics in the 1980s was in favor of circumcision, 1990s was against it, and ever since the 2000s, it declared officially that circumcision is beneficial, but it has to be done under special circumstances, but they do endorse it because it slows down the sexually transmitted diseases, and it also slows down infections in the bladder and the kidneys.
So you must have been part of the lives of hundreds and thousands of young men and boys and young men. Have you ever done the sons and grandsons of people?
Yeah, I'm blessed to have done already maybe 50 families that I did a bris for their father, and now I'm doing the bris for their sons. Like in my case, I did my 3 sons, which are now adults, and I also did 3 of my grandchildren. The latest one 3 years ago. So I've been seeing different generations.
And many of these boys have also been your patients.
Yeah, that's so many times I'm now taking care of patients that are children of my patients. They still come back to me. That's very nice to see them grow.
That's lovely. So let's talk a little bit about you and your early life. Tell us where you were born and where you grew up and what life was like when you were a child.
I was born in Mexico City, and I went to Jewish school in Mexico City. And I didn't go to religious school because there was no religious school to go to, but it was a Jewish day school. My father and mother were religious, observant, Orthodox. So I grew up in that scenario. And then when I was in middle school, at the end of elementary school, I joined an organization called Bnei Akiva. Bnei Akiva is an organization that teaches children to work together, to believe that Israel is the solution to solve many problems of the Jewish people. They teach you about kibbutzim, which is communal farms, and what to do. So I grew up with them, and what I am now is thanks to them. They taught me how to read the Torah, which I'm a professional balcore, and how to conduct services. Because of them, when I finished high school before medical school, I spent 1.5 years in a kibbutz Yavne. And so I really learned a lot from them. And like I say, what I am is thanks to Bnei Akiva.
Bnei Akiva is generally known as an Orthodox Zionist youth movement.
Correct. Yeah.
So you spent 1 year in a kibbutz Yavne. Where is kibbutz Yavne?
Yeah, kibbutz Yavne is in between Tel Aviv and Ashkelon. It's very close to the main road.
And how old were you when you were on the kibbutz?
17 or 18, more or less.
And what did you do when you were there?
Well, I was with the American Hachshara. When you go to Israel, it's called Hachshara. That's the name of the program.
Preparation.
Preparation. And I went, there were only 2 Mexicans, a friend of mine and me. The rest were Americans. Nobody knew how to drive stick. And all the tractors and caterpillars and cotton pickers, they all need to know how to change gear. So I became really a driver. I used to drive the 18-wheelers, the cotton pickers. I used to plow the ground. So I really became in love with working as a farmer. So much so that when my year ended, I applied to the University of Rehovot agronomy, and they accepted me. And I was going to live in the kibbutz for a few years when I was going to learn to be specialized in agriculture. But when you live in a kibbutz as a foreign person, Hachshara, they give you a foster family. So my foster mother, actually a very important woman, she walked from Russia through Turkey to Israel before 1948. And she was my foster mother. So she told me, Aaron, a tractor driver cannot be a doctor. Any doctor can be a tractor driver. And she pushed me so much, she convinced me to come back to Mexico to study medicine. So thanks to her, I was able to go back.
That's fascinating. Tell me about your parents and your grandparents. Where did your grandparents emigrated from Europe? Is that so?
No, my father was born in Raton, Poland, a city he said 20 miles away from Warsaw. And even though he was Jewish and he went to yeshiva, he somehow managed to get into medical school in Poland, which is almost unheard of because Polish universities will not take Jews. But he was accepted, and he was studying medicine. So when the Second World War broke, he was an officer. For some reason, he was stationed in France. So he escaped Europe in the last boat that left France, but they wouldn't let him go into the United States. So he ended up going to Mexico. And that's where I met him. He met my, so all his family was killed except for two brothers that he learned many years later were still alive. And my mother, her father was from Morocco, and he moved to Mexico City. So she was second generation from a Moroccan Jew.
Mm-hmm. And what was the name of the school you attended?
I went to two schools. The first one I went from pre-K to middle school. It was just called Nuevo Colegio Israelita, the new Jewish school in Mexico. But that school did not have high school. So for high school, I moved to another school called Colegio Israelita de Mexico, Israelite College of Mexico. So that I finished 12th grade in that school.
And was there, what do you recall about celebrating Jewish holidays or Jewish events, or what was the Jewish community like in Mexico City?
Well, the Jewish community is very well organized, even though people many times, when I tell a non-Jew that we have a Jewish community in Mexico, they cannot believe it because many see that a Mexican is wearing a sombrero and they don't imagine a Jewish community in Mexico. But the Jewish community in Mexico is beautiful. We have from all European Jews, Syrian Jews, from Turkey and all that. And there is a very big place called Deportivo Israelita de Mexico, which is like a huge JCC, that there's activities for everybody, wherever you are 1 year old or you're a senior citizen that needs activities. They have theaters, bowling alley, restaurants, and so you can basically live there. So it's a very nice or nicely organized community. And there's so many schools now, there's high schools. Now there's a lot of very religious people that started to build schools in the last 20 years. So whatever you are only traditional or extremely observant, there's something for you in Mexico. And there are many kosher restaurants, kosher supermarkets that was not available when I was in Mexico.
Mm-hmm. And what languages did you speak? Did you hear or speak at home?
Well, I grew up. My father spoke to me Yiddish only, and the two schools that I went to taught all the students from the beginning Yiddish, Hebrew, Spanish, and English. So when you graduate from any of the Jewish schools in Mexico, in my times, you knew 4 languages. For the last decade or so, they stopped teaching Yiddish, but they still teach you English and Spanish.
Mm-hmm. And did your father ever sing to you in Yiddish, or? Well,
especially in Shabbat table, we sing. It's called Smirot.
Mm-hmm.
So we used to sing a lot on Friday night and on the lunch meal for Shabbat.
Do you remember any particular songs that are distinctive?
Well, in the background, because the songs I learned later on were more modern. So yes. He used to sing the old-fashioned shtetl kind of music. So if I hear it, I'll recognize it, but I probably don't remember it.
Oh. Okay. And do you remember any songs that your mother used to sing?
No, my grandfather that came from Morocco became totally non-observant. So my mother knew she was Jewish, and actually my father met her when she was working. There was a school called Sephardic school in Mexico. There was basically Syrian Jews from Damascus, which are the Damascus Jews are different from the Aleppo Jews. So she was a secretary there, and that's when my father met her, and that's they got married.
So just being part of the community was something that you were raised with?
Since the beginning, being part of the community was important, to work in different organizations. So when I grew up, there was a big park in a big street called Amsterdam. Maybe it was 4-mile radius, but it was a round area. It used to be a horse racetrack, but now there's houses and everything. So in the center was a huge park. And around the park, there was Bnei Akiva, the Jewish Boy Scouts, Shomer HaTzair, Yehuda Bonim, and Beitar. All those are different Zionistic organizations, and they all were in the same area. And we played with the children in the park or in the afternoon because we had to be together because there were a lot of attacks. Anti-Semitic people will come in a gang and try to beat you up, even hit you with sticks, and even worse than that. So we were together, so we had all the plans established. There were scouts watching if the gang was on their way, so they'll signal everybody to run, put the children back in the safe area, and us that were trained how to fight and self-defense will come out and fight these guys.
I was going to ask you, what do you remember about anti-Semitism or attacks on Jews when you were growing up?
There's a lot of anti-Semitism in Mexico, and I never understood why, but when I was my first year in medical school, I met a girl that we became friends after a while. And one day she tells me, you know, I have to ask you a question, you know. In my little town in Mexico, the priest always told us that Jews killed Jesus, and they all have horns. But you are a nice guy, and you don't have horns. So basically, she was totally, without ever, I was the first Jew she saw. So she had a different opinion. In Mexico, if you walk with a yarmulke, you are in danger. Mm-hmm. You will be attacked for sure.
Wow. It's very interesting. So tell me, you graduated from high school, and tell us about your higher education.
Well, Mexico is a very wise country, like some European countries. When you finish high school, 12th grade is like college. So if you're going to go to do something related to maths, architecture, physics, you do intense 7-8 hours a day of that assignment. If you're going to dentist or biology or something else, you study intense. So 12th grade is equivalent to college. Then you go straight to grad school. Mm-hmm. So it's not like in here, all the people that I know that spend a lot of money in college and all that, they work in something else that they could have done without a college degree. Very few go into grad school and then finish. So in my mind, college is a waste of time because people don't learn anything, and what they learn, they cannot work in that area. So in Mexico, you finish high school, you go straight to grad school.
And you knew you wanted to be a doctor?
I always wanted, first I wanted to be a pilot.
A pirate?
A pilot.
A pilot?
Yeah. So because I wore glasses, they didn't accept me. So then I became a doctor. So, yeah. At some point I combined both of them when I opened my practice, and there were not many big hospitals in South Florida, and they needed to transport a baby like from the Bahamas to Florida or from Florida to New York. I started working for Air Ambulance Associates. So many times I flew in the jet, and in the way back, they let me sit in the cockpit. So I was able to somehow be in a cockpit. So
that's wonderful. So you fulfilled the dream a little bit.
A little bit, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So where did you go to medical school?
I went, there's a big Mexican university called Universidad Autónoma de México. It's a very, very big school and follows the American curriculum. Since I started my first year, I bought all the textbooks in English, even though because all of them are translated. I said, one day I want to be somewhere else. So all my textbooks I bought in English. And when the time came to leave Mexico because of anti-Semitism, and I had to take the ECFMG test to be accepted in an American program, then I was able to. But I finished medical school. I did my pediatric residency in Mexico. Mm-hmm. Since there's no reciprocity between Mexico and the U.S., I had to do it all over again in University of Miami.
So give us the dates. When did you attend medical school and when did you graduate?
Let me see. I finished, I got my medical degree in 1978, more or less. You have my CV in case, correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah. And I did my residency of pediatrics until 1982. Mm-hmm. And I came to the U.S. in 1983.
So tell me, so you came to the U.S. in 1983. What was involved in your decision to come to the United States? Was it something you had been thinking about for a long time? How difficult was it? I think that's something people want to know.
Yeah, coming back to the security in Mexico, I was very involved in the self-defense. There was an organization that would teach Mexican students how to defend themselves in case they were attacked. I was very, very involved with that organization.
You have a degree in martial arts, don't you?
I'm a black belt in Shotokan, and I did 3 years of Kung Fu. And in Mexico, I learned Krav Maga, so I did a lot of training.
Krav Maga is the hand-to-hand combat that they use in the Israeli army.
Correct. So we learned all those things. So that's why when we had to confront the gangs that were attacking the kids, we were able to really give them, because we also knew how to use not guns, but we can use sticks and knives and all that. So we train on all that, how to protect ourselves. But the last year, when I made the decision to come to the U.S., Mexico was the first country to give diplomatic status to the Palestine Liberation Organization. Since then, anti-Semitism became really, really strong in Mexico City, to the point that the last 2 years before I left Mexico, the head of the community said that babies and women should not go to synagogue for Kol Nidre or for nearly because it was dangerous. And actually, in some schools they put bombs, in some synagogues they put bombs. So I said, I don't want to have my children grow up in a country that you cannot go to synagogue. So I tried to apply to get my, to do my residency again in the U.S. Since I passed, there's a test called ECFMG, and I took it just as a personal challenge, just to have the degree in my office that I passed something in English, but I passed the test. So with the ECFMG, I was able to apply for programs, but then I still needed a Social Security. So my wife's father, he died last year. He was an American. He lived in the U.S., so he petitioned us. And thanks to that, I was able to come here.
He sponsored you.
Correct.
So, by the way, when he said that women and children should not go to Ne'ilah or Kol Nidre, was that any specific reason, those services, or was just that was the time everybody knew Jews were in synagogue?
They knew that, and if there was any time they could attack big crowds, would be those times.
I see. And you actually attacked, you actually stood guard and fought
many times
with fists and knives and...
Yeah, because we couldn't trust the police. In here, for example, like in the synagogues in here, since the thing with 9/11 and all that, we have police that help the synagogue. We even hire armed security in our synagogue.
That's here in Boca Raton.
In Boca Raton. So on those days, you couldn't trust police. The police were more dangerous than the criminals. So you had to learn in Mexico in those days. So you couldn't trust them to defend you, because even if you hire one, if they all see somebody with a knife, they will run. So they will not stay and defend anybody. So we didn't rely on them. We rely on us only.
So you actually beat people up?
Yeah.
Do you remember any particular case of any particular large person that you had difficulty?
Well, you know what? It was a group. There was a big gang in a bar that had a billiard, pool tables. And the main leader of that gang used to be called the German. So after a while, we learned that the attacks that we were having in the park on Shabbat were coming from this gang. And we learned that on Wednesday evenings, they used to get drunk and play. So we knew they were there. So we went there. This time we were more than them. We had like 50 people attack these 8-10 guys that were there. We beat them to the pulp, and we left. We never had any more attacks ever since.
And how many other people worked in this, did this defense work with you?
It's a secretive organization. For example, I don't know who is above me and who is below me, and the kids that are training don't know anybody but just one person. So before I left Mexico, I was before the highest rank in that organization.
Is there a name for this organization?
They call it La Pluga.
La Pluga is Hebrew,
yeah,
the troop.
Yeah. It's like the JDL, but not sanctioned. Here you know who is the JDL leader, and you know what they do. Over that will not be sanctioned by the government.
And were you ever afraid of getting hurt?
I was hurt, of course. We used to have training camps. We will go for a whole weekend outside the city, and we will organize fights and skirmishes and all that, even with sticks and false knives. So we learn how to.
Were you afraid you would hurt your hands and not be able to do medical work?
I have broken my hands so many times in martial arts and fights that you take the risk.
Wow. So you were able to emigrate to the United States in 1983. You had somebody sponsor you.
Yes.
And your wife.
Yeah.
And you said you were looking for a commute. Well, where did you live when you first came to the United States?
We used to live in Kendall because it was the cheapest rent when I was a resident in the University of Miami. And when I was in the last 6 months of my residency, I started really, where will I work? Because I grew up in modern Orthodox communities. I don't like to be in an extremely religious community, but many times will not be accepting of modern people. So I interviewed in many communities, but I went to see their communities, and I was not very impressed with them. I was even thinking of going back to Mexico. So one day I was doing a residency in the intensive care unit in the newborn, and then my boss, the fellow, he also a religious Jew, he told me, do you know there's a community starting in Boca Raton? Boca Raton, the mouth of the rat, is such a place like the mouth. That's why in Spanish Boca Raton means the mouth of the rat. And he gave me the name of the persons. I contacted them. And then I saw the community. I saw there was no building, but there was land. And I got very excited to be able to be pioneer in a community like that. And ever since, I've been very, very active in Boca Raton Synagogue, past president, board member. Now I'm totally, I don't have to run for the board anymore. I'm a board emeritus, if you want to call it. And so yeah, it's, and my wife also, she worked very hard for the community as well.
Mm-hmm. What were your first impressions of Boca Raton when you arrived? What was it like physically? What was it like in terms of the Jewish community?
Well, where we are is an area that's called the Circle. We call it the Circle.
Montoya Circle.
Montoya Circle. And it's a there's no big streets. Kids cannot be overrun by a car. And no matter which development you live, towards the center is Boca Raton Synagogue. So I said, this is the place to be. This community has a great future because it's not in a parking lot, it's not in a big street, and it's beautiful homes and everything. So I realized that this place will be one of the biggest places soon. And that's why I gave all my energy to Boca Raton Synagogue.
So they had already bought the land on Montoya Circle.
When I came to Boca, they started 3 or 4 years before I came, when they had the first meeting, Easy Brook and Neville's the F and Jonathan Sandhouse. All those that created the whole group, and Dr. Rand were already active. But to move in the circle, we were one of the first families actually moved into the circle. That's it.
Mm-hmm. According to my notes, the founding meeting for Boca Raton Synagogue was 1983. And they bought the land a few years later. So, but when did you actually move? When did you buy your house in Boca Raton?
Well, at the beginning I didn't buy because I rented, but I made sure that my job security is there. So I rented in this development in the entrance of the circle, and I rented for a few years. And then when I saw that this is the place for me, I bought my first house in 1988.
So, but for how long were you? When did you start renting in Boca?
1986.
Oh, so you were around earlier.
Yeah. That's when I finished my residency, and that's when I moved to Boca.
Mm-hmm. And what do you remember in those days? If you wanted to buy kosher meat or go out to a kosher restaurant, what did you do? We have to take turns. Each neighbor took turns to go to Miami, to 163rd Avenue, and we'll put an order for everybody, the meat, the bakery, because there was nothing in Boca, no restaurants, no kosher stores, no nothing. What about Broward County or Hollywood?
Broward County also didn't have that much either. So at some point, like in the early 90s, they opened a kosher store in Sample Road. And it didn't last too long, but we used to go there for a while.
Mm-hmm. And what do you remember about some of the early people that you came across as the founders?
Were younger people, all very enthusiastic, all very willing to work. And we used to spend sometimes, besides your regular day job, we used to spend at least 4 to 6 hours a day, sometimes printing newsletters, organizing things. We didn't have any hired crew. So before services, we cleaned the place, and after services, we cleaned the place. And because we didn't have any money to buy a garbage a collector that's expensive, each person took the garbage home every week. So we started off in a very, very economical budget.
And so I understand in February 1987, the synagogue moved into the first building at 7900 Montoya Circle.
Correct.
Do you remember that?
Oh, I could never forget. I'm moving into the area because we used to have services in people's homes. And moving into our own building was really a great feeling. I mean, we were so happy about it. We introduced a new Torah, and it was beautiful.
Mm-hmm. How did you raise money for the new building, or do you remember being?
I'm not a big fundraiser, but we had a few people like Dr. Rand and Jonathan Sandhouse and Easy Brook that they were able to raise money to build the building.
Mm-hmm.
And also the area where we built it was not zoned for a synagogue. Mm-hmm. So they were the ones that did the work to allow the city to allow us to build the synagogue and change the zoning.
And that must have been a challenge.
Very big challenge.
I will have to ask them about that. I think that must have been a big challenge. So Also, it says here in the history about the synagogue that February 1989 began the process of obtaining the first eruv, the first enclosure around the synagogue so that people could carry things.
When these projects are very, very hard to do and very expensive. So when I was president, my board of directors...
Tell us about when you became president.
So, some of this has to be off the record. There was a rabbi that we hired that was very destructive and wanted to completely change the community.
What was his name?
Rabbi Winiars.
Mordechai Winiars.
Mordechai Winiars. Then he switched it to Gaffney.
He arrived in 1988.
He
left in 1989.
Correct. He impressed us when he came for the interview. He was a genius speaker, a genius. I mean, you know, there's a holiday called Shavuot that supposedly you stay up all night studying. Every other time I went, I fell asleep after the second class. He was such a good speaker, I was up all night. That was the only time I lasted all night. He was an amazing speaker, but evil. When they saw that he's taking over the synagogue, the former president and one of the fundraisers, Dr. Rand, together with Rabbi Zweig from the yeshiva from Miami, and another friend of mine, convinced me to become president, because if we didn't take over, the shul was going to disappear. So we worked very, very hard. It was very stressful 6 months of that. The board that was elected were all totally elected by Winiars, but they were intelligent people. So when I presented to them all the evidence that he was stealing money from the rabbi discretionary fund, that he's doing inappropriate activities with some members and all that black and white proof, the board member itself, when we decided to get rid of it, was a unanimous vote to get rid of him.
So originally he had the support of a faction of members. And
the whole board was against me because they were appointed by they ran because they were asked by Winiars to run and neutralize me.
It happens in synagogues.
Yeah.
So he left in '89.
Yeah.
And tell me about how is that related to the eruv?
Well,
we first went up in August 1989.
Yeah, we voted when I was president to have the mikvah and the eruv. We didn't have the financing, but there was an official decision of the board of directors that we want to do it, we want to pursue it, and we started to investigate how can we build the mikvah, how to do the eruv, and eventually the eruv came after. I think with Rabbi Brander is when the eruv came, because after we fired Rabbi Winiars, we had Rabbi Newman for a year. And after Rabbi Newman, we hired Rabbi Brander.
So whose idea was it that you needed to have a mikvah?
Well, it's very important. There's something called Taharat HaMishpacha.
Explain a little bit
so
about
in the Jewish tradition, when a married couple cannot be sexually active the entire month, during the menstrual cycle of the woman, it cannot be sexual activity. So at the end of the cycle, when then she goes to the mikvah, she declares that she's pure already.
A ritual bath.
A ritual bath. And then they have sexual activity. And so it's something that's really sacred even at that point. So the mikvah allows you to do that. Until the mikvah was built, we had to go to Hollywood or to Miami to the mikvah.
So women in the community who had to use a mikvah would travel.
Exactly, we had to travel. Yeah.
And one has to use the mikvah at night, so they would go.
And it's a kind of dangerous. So that's why the priority was the mikvah and the eruv. And the eruv, because the eruv is a barrier. It's not like a wall. There could be cables to designate a special size of land, and if it has that wire around it, you can carry. You can carry your keys, you can carry
and push baby
carriages. Push baby carriages and all that. Like I just came back from San Diego. I went to a wedding, and we went to synagogue, and there's no eruv in downtown San Diego. So we have to hire somebody that gets paid to push the carrier because there's no eruv. So the eruv is very, very important for the observance of Shabbat. Otherwise, it's very difficult to observe Shabbat without the eruv.
I've heard, by the way, that when they built the mikvah in Boca Raton, that's when the community really began to grow.
It was together also with Rabbi Brander and the mikvah. And the mikvah was built in a way that fit any requirements, whatever you were Chabad, whatever you were Chosid, whatever you were Modern Orthodox. The mikvah fits any demands of any Jewish denomination. And so that's why it became very popular. So we have a mikvah for men, a mikvah for women, and a mikvah for the dishes. When you buy a new dish that's metal or glass, you cannot use it until you submerge it in the mikvah.
So So let's see. Rabbi Newman came along. So you were president. What years exactly were you president?
I think it was
1989?
88, 89, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
And then you were there in the summer of 1990. They started a rabbinic search committee after having 3 rabbis in 6 years.
Correct.
And that's when you found Rabbi Kenneth Brander.
Correct.
Tell me something about the process of finding.
I was in part of the committee doing the interviews of the candidates, and Rabbi Brander impressed us tremendously because he was like 26 years old, and he had already achieved a lot of recognition. He was in Lincoln Square Synagogue, he was the youth director there, and at some point it was rumored that the rabbi risking when he retired, he will consider him to take over. And Lincoln Square Synagogue, Lincoln is a big synagogue, so he came with us. He saw, by the time Rabbi Brander came, we had already an adult education program, we had Bnei Akiva, we had a sisterhood, we have a welcoming committee, we had a newsletter. So when Rabbi Brander came and he saw that we already were very well organized, when he came we had like 80, 90 families. But we were organized and we offered everything for adults, for children, so it's not like there was nothing in here. So when he came and the mikvah became over there, and because of his leadership, it grew exponentially. But we already had established the base.
So as far as I've read that when he came there were 85 families,
Correct.
more or less, and by the time he left in 2005 there were 600 or 700.
Correct.
And the day schools had been, the Weinbaum Yeshiva High School had been built. There had been tremendous growth.
Correct.
So tell us a little, what did you observe about those years between the time Rabbi Brander came? He started in June 1991. How did you see things grow after that? How did that happen?
Well, there's a lot of issues with education. The first pseudo preschool that we had before Rabbi Brander came, we established like a daycare for with a mother that volunteered. She used to be a pre-K teacher. That was the first school in Boca Raton Synagogue. Then we used to ship our children to Hillel in Miami. That was before Brander came. And I was very...
Was that K through 6 or K through 8?
Even pre-K, they used to be shipped. And they used to make Hillel was very gracious. They gave us a bus with air conditioning and with seat belts and all that. Every morning there was 30, 40 kids going from Boca Raton Synagogue.
How long was the drive?
40 minutes or so. So when my wife and I saw that, we went to speak to the principal of the school. Why don't you open a branch in Boca? There's a big need for a modern religious Orthodox school. Why don't you come to Boca? So the principal and the CEO said to me, we cannot come as long as Rabbi Wieners is here. So the day I fired Rabbi Wieners and he was out of the community, my wife and I drove to Miami, spoke to the principal, Rabbi Rav, and the CEO, and they agreed to send to establish Hillel in Boca. So my wife and I were the ones that actually brought the Hillel school in Boca. And in the first few years, it was in Bnei Torah, where they were leasing until they built a beautiful campus. So when Rabbi Brander came, we were already dealing with having a Hillel in Boca, renting a space. And after that, he fundraised the money to first of all, to eventually build the Yeshiva High School building. And now both the Yeshiva High School and Hillel have beautiful, beautiful campuses next to the JCC in Boca.
Let me ask a question, since you mentioned Bnei Torah. How did BRS get along with the other synagogues and the other branches of Judaism?
Very cordial, like both Rabbi Brander and now Rabbi Goldberg are always talking and meeting with the rabbis, Reform, Conservative. They have meetings. They even established a Bada Kashrut. It's the first time in many years that all the Conservative, Reform, and Orthodox get together to give a certificate to kosher restaurants or kosher stores. So they both, Rabbi Brander and Rabbi Goldberg, were always working very close together with the other community. So we had a very nice relationship with them. I did the bris to a few rabbis from Bnei Torah and also from Bethel. So we have a nice relationship.
So lately, there's been something called Jewish Unity Day. When I think it's in June, where the Jews from different backgrounds meet together.
Yeah, the JCC did it this year very nicely. I couldn't attend because I was on call, but it was very nice.
So what are some of the turning points that you remember in the life of BRS? Are there any particular events, anything to do with Israel that stands out in your mind?
Well, we're very pro-Israel synagogue. So every time anything happens in Israel, it hurts us. So our rabbis, both Rabbi Brand and Rabbi Goldberg, anytime there is an issue, we gather together, we have lectures, we even do demonstrations, so we send letters to people. Our synagogue is very, very together with that. Most of our children go to the March of the Living. The synagogue used to organize trips to Israel, even on those days where people were afraid to go to Israel because of the Intifada. Boca Raton synagogue sent a few tours to go there. So the Israel is one of the aspects, and then the community grows fast because of, like we mentioned before, the mikvah, the Eruv, and the schools. So now if you come from New York, there's everything that you want to live in this community. There's a new school east of Boca, Boca Raton, that's more religious than Hillel. So if you want to go to a place like that, there's room for that. So it's growing everywhere.
Mm-hmm. And do you see more people moving here to join the community?
I think every week there's a magazine that gets published every week. At least very rarely a week goes by that you don't see "Welcome to this family, to the community." People move all the time.
Mm-hmm. And do you remember any? I should have asked this question earlier. Do you remember any anti-Semitism in Boca Raton, or hearing about anything? Or
there was in the first few years after we opened the building, there were a few times that we got phone calls threatening the Jews and to kill them. And in one occasion, I remember one Shabbat afternoon before the service of Mincha, I was standing in the lobby of the synagogue, and my middle son was standing there. Somebody shot BB guns through the window. He got almost hit. So I ran out, and I recognized a special sports car with yellow, with black, and whatever. So I called police. I told them what happened. And one day when I was walking back from synagogue on Friday night, I saw that car. And I saw which development it entered. So I walked into there. I finally saw the apartment where they were living. I reported them to the JDL, and then they left. They never came back again.
Wait, you reported it to the JDL?
And the police.
And the police?
Yeah.
Okay. And there is a JDL down here?
Well, there's a number that I called. I remember exactly. Somebody from New York knew how to contact them. And I told them, this house, this, and this is a car, this is a license plate, and this is the apartment number.
And when you mean they never came back again, you never saw
They
the
moved
car again?
I never saw the car, and they moved out.
They left the neighborhood.
And ever since, we don't have that much, but we have a lot of concern about security. Like I told you, in Mexico City, that Deportivo, that JCC, since I was little, even before 9/11, there were metal detectors. They always search you. I grew up in a community you have to protect yourself. So now, when we see that we have to have armed security in campus, and we have to have a lot of things, so I worried about it. But we have, besides that incident, nothing has happened yet.
Mm-hmm. And tell me about how you've seen the town grow. For example, what kosher establishments do you recall coming and being happy about? Like, you don't have to take an order and one person goes to Miami to get kosher meat for everybody.
The first restaurant that was in the area was a pizza place, Sarah's Pizza. It was not the greatest, but it was there. But you know, I didn't get so excited about it, but my kids used to like it. Then a Chinese restaurant opened in Del Rey. It used to be called, I believe, Essen and Essen. Great Chinese food. We were so happy. Everybody loved it. It was full. Out of the blue, they closed down. So again, we had no restaurants in the area. And suddenly, in the last few years, we have a lot of Israeli places. We have sushi places, dairy places, pizza places. Now, there is no absence. You can choose 8 to 10 restaurants or more in the area, and they're all very good.
When did Kosher Market, the Grove, open up?
I don't remember exactly the year, maybe 7, 8 years ago. That place used to be a deli store. And that deli store eventually became kosher. They started to bake kosher bagels and challahs, and they had fish and cream cheese, so you could eat breakfast there. It used to be called Strathmore. And then they closed. Then somebody opened a kosher restaurant next door, called Gourmet Natural. Also didn't last that long. But then, for a while, there was no Jewish establishment with kosher market is after Strathmore closed. But then they rented the space, and that's when we were so happy having such a big kosher market. And now we have competition. We have Aroma here. So
that just opened a few months ago.
Competition is good because the prices go down. So we are very happy with both establishments. I go to both. And they both allow us to bring gift cards that BRS sells us. So every time I pay my groceries with a gift card from BRS gets 10% of a donation from. So that's something that both Aroma also has the same program.
Tell me about your children. How many children do you have? And how
well, first, my wife, before I tell you my children, she also grew up as a very active leader in her community from the Boy Scouts and all that. Then she started up the sisterhood in here. And she started the welcoming committee. And also,
what is her name?
Yvette Kaweblum. And for the last 14 years, she's the head of the Hebra Kadisha. Hebra Kadisha is a burial society that when a Jewish person dies, has to be treated in a special way, has to have a special bath, a special dressing, and it's a very, very hard job. So she's been in charge of that for the last 14 years.
Actually has to bathe and wash deceased people.
Correct, and prepare them for burial. So with all that activity that me and my wife did, and I was on call all the time, my children were very supportive of us. So when we came to the U.S., we only had one son, the oldest one, Jonathan. The middle one was born when I was doing my residency in Miami. And the third one was born when I was already in Boca. And now I'm blessed with the oldest and the youngest are married. And between the two of them, we have 5 beautiful grandchildren. So, and it was very, very nice.
And do they live in the area?
Yeah, I'm very blessed. They live in Hollywood, in the community in Hollywood. So they are close and far at the same time. So, you know, they always call me to babysit, and it's a pleasure, and, you know, we're very blessed, yeah.
I've heard that one of the reasons they're putting resources into Boca Raton Synagogue West is they want people to move to Boca Raton Synagogue West and not to Hollywood.
Correct. Before Boca West we had another BRS in Boca Grove. That didn't last that long. And then the price of houses here are so expensive in the circle that Boca West was a big welcome thing because the houses there are more affordable. So you can still belong to BRS. BRS West comes to the board meetings. They are the same as we are. All the activities are shared, but they can live in a place where they have not an expensive housing area. Yeah.
And what do you see as the future of Boca Raton? How do you see it developing in the years ahead?
Well, Boca Raton as a town is changing so much. Before, we knew that before the snowbirds came, it was everything slow, very quiet, even in pediatrics, because there were many couples that lived half and half. And then it got very busy traffic when the snowbirds came. But now you see the same traffic all year round. When we came to Boca, Palmero Park Road was only a 2-lane highway that ended in Boca del Mar Drive. So if you had to cross to the west part of Boca, you had to either use Hillsboro or Glades Road. So now we have a 4-lane bridge, Palmero Park Road, that goes all over. So the town is growing. And try driving in Glades Road or Power Line Road at 6 p.m. is almost like New York City. So we are getting a big city now that has a lot of things that it didn't have before.
It's also a more international city than it used to be. Would you say so?
Yeah.
Do you see more patients and families from other countries?
I have a lot of patients that from Germany, from England, from Australia, that somehow live here part-time, and I see them a few times of the year. So there's a lot of people that don't live permanently here, but like to stay in Boca for many months.
Are there Jews from other countries that you see?
I do. But most of the international patients are, I have a few Jews that live in Israel part-time, so those I see often. And there are many non-Jews that live in Europe and come here, and they stay here part-time, so I take care of them also.
Well, Dr. Kaweblum, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure talking with you today.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much.